Wu Zetian. She was the only female emperor in the history of China, ruling during the late Tang dynasty and founding the Zhou dynasty, 690 to 705. Wu Zetian was renowned for her extraordinary political talent, governing the empire with firm authority and expanding its power, yet she was also known as a figure of unparalleled ruthlessness, willing to eliminate any rivals to secure her throne. In the history of imperial China, the inner palace was often a hidden battlefield, a place where power struggles were silent yet far more brutal than any war front. Amid this treacherous world, Wu Zetian rose as an extraordinary anomaly, a woman who started from nothing, once a low-ranking concubine serving Emperor Taizong of Tang, later forced into a convent after his death, then unexpectedly summoned back to the court by Emperor Gaozong of Tang. From that moment, she began her ascent to power through beauty, intellect, and an almost inhuman ruthlessness. But to claim the throne as Empress consort, she had to remove two formidable rivals, Empress Wang, the reigning and politically powerful empress backed by noble clans, and consort Xiao, the emperor's beloved favorite. Despite Wu's growing favor, she had no political foundation, and defeating both women seemed nearly impossible. Yet her ambition far exceeded mere affection. Wu understood that only by becoming empress could she control the harem and gradually dominate the imperial court. This realization led her to plot one of the darkest and boldest schemes in palace history, killing her own infant daughter to frame Empress Wang, thereby clearing her path to power. In 654, Wu gave birth to a baby girl with Emperor Gaozong. The child's birth initially appeared to secure Wu's position, earning her even more of the emperor's favor while quietly stirring jealousy in Empress Wang. On the seventh day after birth, the emperor and Empress Wang visited the newborn. After they left, an unthinkable crime occurred within the quiet chambers of the palace. According to records in Old Book of Tang and New Book of Tang, Wu coldly strangled her own infant as the baby lay asleep. When attendants later discovered the lifeless body, Wu let out anguished cries, feigning unbearable grief, then swiftly accused Empress Wang of secretly returning to the chamber to murder the child out of jealousy. The accusation struck Emperor Gaozong like thunder from a clear sky, shocking him and planting deep suspicion toward his legitimate wife. Wu did not stop at exploiting the emperor's grief, she cleverly fabricated evidence to support her claims. She spread rumors that Wang had repeatedly shown envy over the emperor's obsession with Wu and had even vowed not to allow Wu to produce an heir. Several palace maids secretly bribed by Wu testified that they had seen Wang near the baby's chamber after the imperial couple had left. Faced with the heartbreaking death of his daughter and these false testimonies, the weak-willed emperor fully believed Wang was the murderer. From that point on, Empress Wang's fate plunged into ruin. She was isolated, lost favor, and was eventually deposed from her throne, confined to the cold palace. Yet Wu was not satisfied. Knowing that simply deposing Wang would not secure her own safety, she persuaded Gaozong to eliminate both Wang and consort Xiao completely. Ultimately, the two once powerful women were dragged out, had their limbs hacked off, and were thrown into a vat of wine until they died, a savage execution that terrified the entire harem. Shortly afterward, Wu Zetian was formally installed as empress consort, laying the foundation for her later rise to supreme power. Her act of murdering her own child to frame a rival has horrified generations, yet it also reveals her cold-blooded determination. In the politics of the imperial harem, the position of empress was not just a title, it was the key to controlling the palace and influencing the court. Wu knew that as long as Wang remained, she would always be just another concubine, no matter how many children she bore. The newborn, though her own flesh and blood, became a sacrificial pawn in a life-or-death game for power, where maternal love could not compete with ambition. It exemplified Wu's lifelong philosophy that, the end justifies the means. That bloody scheme became the decisive turning point that transformed her from an obscure concubine into empress, and eventually the sole female emperor in all of Chinese history. Though some modern scholars question the story's authenticity, suggesting the baby might have died from illness and that Wu's political enemies exaggerated the tale to defame her after her death, most historians still regard it as plausible, given her iron will and boundless hunger for power. Whether truth or slander, the the story endures as one of the most infamous and controversial episodes in history, a stain of blood on Wu Zetian's path to the throne, and a chilling reminder of the terrible price of power, a price even greater than maternal love or humanity itself. After seizing the position of Empress Consort through a plot that shocked the empire, Wu Zetian did not stop there. To her, that victory was only the first step toward absolute power. She understood that the inner palace of the Tang court was not merely a place to compete for Emperor Gaozong of Tang's affection, but a nerve center of political intrigue, where every concubine, princess, and royal relative could become a pawn for powerful aristocratic factions. Even a single discontented figure could shake the throne. Thus, Wu devised a long-term and merciless plan, a sweeping purge of the imperial harem and royal clan, erasing every trace of opposition and turning the entire court into an obedient machine under her control. In the first years after becoming empress, Wu launched a series of small but relentless purges. She did not strike all at once. Instead, she carefully eliminated the weaker groups first, testing the reactions of the court while avoiding suspicion. Her initial targets were the maids, eunuchs, and officials once loyal to Empress Wang and Consort Xiao, her former rivals. Many were accused of fabricated crimes like whispering slanders, or looking upon the emperor with disrespect, and were quietly beaten to death in prison or poisoned. Others were stripped of titles, had their families ruined, and were exiled to distant frontiers. These small, secret purges allowed Wu to cripple the old palace factions and send a chilling message: anyone connected to her rivals would be erased without mercy. Once the harem's old power base was weakened, Wu turned her attention to the active concubines around Gaozong. She followed a ruthless strategy of probe, isolate, destroy, first deploying spies to observe their attitudes, then spreading rumors to sow suspicion among them, and finally seizing on any slip to accuse them of treason or plotting to harm the emperor. Several young and beautiful consorts, favored by Gaozong, were quickly eliminated, some secretly poisoned, others beaten to death and forced to leave behind false confessions to justify their demise. Within the palace, even a smile could be deemed an insult to the empress, and everyone lived as if treading on thin ice, their hearts pounding with fear each day. After subduing the harem, Wu expanded her purge to the royal clan, princes, princesses, and imperial kinsmen, who, though outside the palace, wielded powerful political influence and could rally factions against her. One of the most infamous cases was forcing Li Zhong, the crown prince, to commit suicide. Li Zhong was intelligent and upright, admired by many officials, but he openly criticized Wu for meddling in state affairs. Wu fabricated charges of filial impiety and plotting rebellion, pressured Gaozong to depose him, and coerced him into drinking poison. She next demoted and poisoned Li Xian, another prince who had once been crown prince but resisted her domination, and later suppressed Li Dan when he showed signs of trying to restore the Tang line. These actions terrified the remaining princes into submission, none dared oppose her again. Even princesses of the Tang royal family were not spared, though they rarely engaged in politics. Simply by virtue of their bloodline, they could serve as figureheads for aristocratic uprisings. Many were falsely accused of absurd crimes like secretly conspiring with foreign tribes, or casting spells against the throne, and were then forced to hang themselves or take poison. Some were shaved bald and exiled to nunneries, living out their days in humiliation. In the patriarchal world of imperial China, where women of the royal blood were usually shielded from political reprisals, this slaughter of princesses was almost unheard of, underscoring Wu's cold, relentless nature. Alongside these killings, Wu employed public humiliation and cruel punishments as psychological weapons to break the will of her enemies. Those suspected of disloyalty were beaten, tortured, or degraded in front of the court. Some concubines were stripped naked, had their hair shaved, and were forced to pull ox carts across the courtyard as a warning to others. Certain royal nobles were beheaded and their heads displayed in the marketplace, their properties confiscated and families exiled to remote frontiers. These punishments did not just kill bodies, they crushed the spirit of resistance across the nobility. To reinforce her reign of terror, Wu built an extensive network of spies and secret police. She established the censorate of surveillance, Jiam Satangusu, a body tasked with covert investigations, anonymous denunciations, and swift executions. A single careless word could lead to charges of treason. Fear spread like a plague through the palace, people whispered and immediately glanced around in panic, trusting no one. The once lively, scheming harem became silent as a graveyard, every gaze cast down as Wu passed by. As Emperor Gaozong of Tang grew increasingly frail, Wu had eliminated nearly all rivals within the harem and the royal family, constructing a power structure loyal only to her. She ruled in his name as regent, but in reality governed the empire as a de facto sovereign. When Gaozong died, she refused to hand power back to the legitimate Tang princes. Instead, she systematically eliminated them one by one through fabricated charges, imprisonment, poisonings, or coerced suicides. Once no challengers remained, she finally abolished the Tang dynasty, founded the Zhou dynasty, and declared herself emperor, becoming the only female emperor in the history of China. Yet behind this glory lay a terrible price, a palace drenched in blood, a royal clan in ruins, and an atmosphere of unspeakable dread over the entire court. Later historians recorded that during Wu's reign, even a careless word could doom an entire family to extermination. Survivors recounted watching concubines, princesses, and princes dragged away for execution, their screams echoing through the cold stone halls, only for silence to swallow the palace afterward. This omnipresent terror ensured that no one dared defy her, even if they secretly loathed her. Through these brutal purges, Wu Zetian annihilated the old order, transforming the once scheming harem and aristocracy into a machine of absolute obedience. Yet history remembers her not only as a brilliant ruler, but also as a symbol of unparalleled ruthlessness, a woman who killed concubines, poisoned princesses, butchered princes, and even destroyed her own bloodline to secure the throne. The empire she built, though glorious, stood on a foundation of blood and fear, a chilling monument to the horrific cost of ambition unleashed beyond all bounds of morality, kinship, or humanity. While Wu Zetian had already purged the harem and royal clan to secure her position, she knew her true challenge lay beyond the palace walls, the powerful scholar-official class of the Tang state. This elite bureaucracy, composed of Confucian-trained ministers, strategists, and intellectuals, had traditionally served as the moral backbone and administrative machinery of China's imperial system. They prized loyalty to the dynasty, not to any individual. To them, Wu was an interloper, a woman who had clawed her way to the throne through blood and manipulation, threatening the Confucian order itself. They whispered in corridors, wrote memorials urging her removal, and quietly rallied around displaced princes of the Tang line. Wu understood that as long as these officials lived and spoke freely, her rule would always be precarious. And so she turned her ruthlessness outward, orchestrating a systematic massacre of political opponents that would drown the bureaucracy in fear. Central to this campaign was the creation of a terrifying secret police institution known as the Lai Fuwei Dao, literally the Bureau of Defensive Surveillance. Ostensibly tasked with protecting the state, it in reality became Wu's personal instrument of repression. The Lai Fuwei Dao planted informants in every ministry and province, recruited spies from servants and guards, and reported directly to Wu herself. They operated outside the normal legal system, empowered to arrest anyone without evidence, hold secret interrogations, and extract confessions through torture. Night after night, black-clad agents slipped through the capital streets, dragging officials from their homes under the cover of darkness. Once taken, few ever returned. Families woke to find their gates sealed and ancestral plaques smashed, their loved ones vanished into the maw of the Empress's terror. Wu wielded this apparatus with cold precision to decapitate the opposition. Prominent Confucian scholars and veteran ministers who questioned her legitimacy were branded as traitors. Among them was Zhang Jianji, a principled statesman known for his loyalty to the Tang house. Zhang had covertly plotted to restore a Tang prince to the throne and curb Wu's authority. When the plot was uncovered by the Lai Fuwei Dao, Wu publicly accused him of treason and plotting to subvert the dynasty. He was paraded through the streets in shackles before being sentenced to death. Though later posthumously rehabilitated, Zhang's execution sent a chilling message: even the most revered Confucian loyalists were not beyond her reach. Another dramatic case was Di Renjie, one of the most brilliant legal minds and upright officials of his generation. Di dared to submit memorials criticizing corruption in Wu's court and subtly urging her to return power to the Tang princes. The Lai Fue Dao swiftly accused him of secret correspondence with exiled rebels. Di was arrested, tortured on the rack, and imprisoned. Only Wu's personal realization that his administrative genius could serve her caused her to halt the execution and later recall him to office. But this reprieve was the rare exception. Most accused officials were not so fortunate. Dozens of high ministers, generals, and scholars were executed in sweeping purges. Wu's regime routinely fabricated charges of treason, espionage, or witchcraft to eliminate them. Courts became mere theaters for scripted confessions. Suspects were flogged until bones cracked, burned with hot irons, or suspended by their wrists for days. Some, unable to withstand the torment, confessed to imaginary plots just to end the agony. Once condemned, they faced grotesque public executions designed to terrorize the living. The punishments were barbaric even by medieval standards. Some officials had their arms and legs hacked off before being left to bleed to death in the marketplace. Others were subjected to lingqi, death by 1,000 cuts, their flesh slowly sliced away as the crowd was forced to watch. Heads of executed ministers were mounted on pikes along the capital's main avenues, while their families were forced to kneel beneath them in chains. Beheadings were conducted in public squares, with drums beating and criers shouting their crimes, so all could hear. Entire clans were often exterminated, wives, children, and even distant cousins were executed or sold into slavery to prevent any seed of revenge from sprouting. Wu's terror extended beyond the capital. The Lai Fue Dao dispatched roaming inquisitors to the provinces to hunt down dissenting thought. Scholars who had once debated policy in lecture halls now whispered in fear, burning their private writings and genealogies. Those suspected of criticizing the empress were seized, flogged, and sometimes executed on the spot without trial. Local magistrates competed to denounce each other, hoping to prove their loyalty and avoid suspicion themselves. This climate of mutual betrayal hollowed out the Confucian bureaucracy, replacing principled governance with sycophantic obedience. Through this calculated slaughter, Wu Zetian achieved her aim. She shattered the moral and institutional backbone of Tang governance and rebuilt it in her own image. Surviving officials learned that virtue and merit meant nothing, only absolute submission ensured survival. Talented but independent-minded statesmen were wiped out, while opportunists who flattered her rose quickly. Records from the time speak of the court as a place where silence was safer than loyalty. Even Di Renjie, after his release, tread with extraordinary caution, counseling her in private while publicly praising her without pause. The psychological toll was immense. Contemporary chroniclers described Chang'an as a city of whispers, where doors slammed shut at dusk, neighbors avoided eye contact, and families spoke only in gestures for fear of hidden informants. The great Confucian academies fell silent, their lecture halls emptied by fear. Intellectual debate, once the lifeblood of Tang political culture, nearly ceased. In its place spread an ideology of terror, Wu as the living axis of the world, unchallengeable, unquestionable. The very notion of loyalty to principle was inverted into loyalty to her person. Yet even as she drowned the realm's intellect in blood, Wu justified it as necessary to preserve order. She portrayed her victims as rebels conspiring to overthrow rightful authority, claiming only her iron rule could prevent chaos. For a time, this worked. The bureaucracy, though gutted of independent thinkers, became ruthlessly efficient at executing her decrees. Dissent vanished. Policy flowed from the throne unopposed. But the price was the soul of the state, a government ruled by fear, not duty, silence, not wisdom. By the time Wu declared herself emperor of the Zhou dynasty, the Confucian officialdom of Tang had been decimated. Generations of scholarship and moral integrity lay buried with the bodies of those she had slaughtered. Even after her death, when the Tang house was restored, it took decades for the bureaucracy to recover its confidence and sense of ethical mission. The name of Lai Fue Dao remained a byword for terror, and Wu's purges stood as a grim monument to the extremes ambition could reach. She had wanted to secure her throne, and she succeeded, but she did so by turning the empire's finest minds into corpses and its proudest voices into whispers. The reign of Wu Zetian shone brilliantly on the surface, but its foundations were built on fear, blood, and the broken bones of those who dared to think. While Wu Zetian ruled with unmatched political ruthlessness, she also wielded another, more intimate weapon to secure and sustain her power, her sexuality. In an era when women were expected to remain demure and invisible in state affairs, Wu shattered convention by openly using sexual allure as a political tool. From her early days as a low-ranking concubine of Emperor Taizong of Tang to her reign as the sole female emperor of China, she understood that desire could be as potent as fear in binding men to her will. And so, as her authority grew, so did the stories, and scandals, about her decadent court, where beauty became currency, and intimacy a lever of power. After seizing the throne, Wu carefully constructed a circle of hand-picked young men celebrated for their looks and charm, bringing them into the palace as attendants, entertainers, and secret companions. These were not ordinary servants but chosen favorites, selected from noble families or the ranks of talented commoners for their physical allure. Many chroniclers mention figures such as the charismatic brothers Zhang Yizhi and Zhang Changzong, who rose from obscurity to extraordinary influence solely through Wu's personal favor. They dressed in embroidered silks, lounged in her private chambers, and openly accompanied her in public ceremonies, something no male lover of an empress had ever dared to do before. This unprecedented display of female sexual agency scandalized the Confucian elite. Court historians, steeped in patriarchal ideals, wrote with undisguised outrage of how Wu paraded her paramours like treasures, and held lavish banquets where these young men sang, danced, and served her wine. Some records describe her personally selecting them from lineups of candidates, examining their appearance as if recruiting soldiers. Such scenes blurred the boundary between imperial governance and personal indulgence, fueling whispers that the palace had become less a seat of government than a luxurious harem with Wu at its center. But Wu's indulgence was never purely personal. She used her beauty and her lovers as instruments of political manipulation. When influential ministers resisted her rule, she often used seduction, directly or through her favorites, to entangle them. A hesitant official might be invited to private banquets where wine flowed and young courtiers entertained. Those who succumbed to temptation found themselves compromised, their secrets and indiscretions carefully noted. Wu would then offer protection and advancement in exchange for loyalty, or threaten exposure to compel obedience. This web of desire and blackmail transformed opponents into dependents, and dependents into silent accomplices. In some cases, Wu even paired her male favorites with powerful court women or the wives and daughters of senior ministers, creating a network of intimate entanglements that blurred personal and political loyalties. These secret liaisons tied entire families to her through bonds of shame and complicity. Ministers who might once have opposed her were now too fearful of scandal to resist. Desire, carefully stage-managed, became a leash. As this system expanded, the imperial court slid into decadence. Lavish parties consumed days that had once been devoted to governance. Music, perfumes, and erotic performances filled the palace halls. Poets and entertainers who could amuse the empress with flirtatious verse were rewarded with titles and estates. Meanwhile, serious statesmen were marginalized or retired in disgust. Chroniclers lamented that merit was forgotten, and beauty became the path to power. The once austere court of the Tang became, under Wu's reign, a theater of luxury where silk-draped pleasure boats glided through lotus ponds while the machinery of state ground undeglected. This culture of indulgence had corrosive effects on the broader political order. Younger officials began to emulate the behavior they saw rewarded, spending fortunes on cosmetics and silks rather than scholarship. Some sought patronage not through diligent service but by courting Wu's male favorites, who acted as informal gatekeepers to imperial favor. Bribes and sexual favors became intertwined, further eroding the meritocratic ideals that had once sustained Tang governance. The imperial bureaucracy, once driven by Confucian discipline, now seemed ruled by whims of beauty and desire. Conservative scholars railed that Wu had transformed the heart of empire into a den of debauchery. They warned that her flaunting of sexual power inverted the moral hierarchy of the world. Where once the emperor embodied restraint and virtue, now the ruler herself flaunted passion and indulgence. Their protests went unheeded, or led to their ruin. Some who decried the corruption of court life were accused of slander or treason and swiftly purged. Others retreated into self-imposed exile, unwilling to watch the state they had served dissolve into spectacle. To many traditionalists, the moral decay symbolized the ultimate danger of female sovereignty. They cast Wu as a cautionary tale, claiming she had unsexed the throne by allowing lust to govern the empire. Yet from Wu's perspective, sexuality was simply another resource to command, no different from armies or gold. By transforming intimacy into politics, she neutralized opposition, inspired fervent devotion among her favorites, and reinforced her own image as untouchable and divine. Desire became part of her arsenal, woven seamlessly into her autocracy. In the end, this erotic empire was inseparable from the authoritarian one. The same court that trembled at her secret police also bent under the spell of her allure. Ministers feared her wrath but coveted her favor, young men sought not to serve the state but to serve her personally. The palace became a paradox, a place of both terror and intoxication, where executions and love songs echoed through the same gilded halls. Wu Zetian's reign dazzled contemporaries with its splendor, but beneath the gold lay rot. She had used beauty as a weapon and pleasure as a chain, turning the heart of the Tang court into a realm where loyalty was bought with desire and morality drowned in silk. By the time her reign ended, the empire she ruled glittered brilliantly on the surface, yet its ethical foundations had been hollowed out by the very sensuality that had helped her rise. In her pursuit of power, Wu had proved that even lust could be forged into a tool of empire, and in doing so, she left the court of China shimmering, trembling, and profoundly corrupted. Once Wu Zetian had eliminated her rivals and consolidated her grip on the throne, she turned her attention to reshaping the state itself to secure her personal rule. The traditional bureaucracy of the Tang dynasty had been built on Confucian ideals of merit, integrity, and collective governance, principles that inherently limited any one person's power. Wu saw these restraints not as safeguards but as obstacles. To her, laws and institutions were tools to be bent, not boundaries to obey. Over the years, she systematically hollowed out the established order and rebuilt it as an apparatus of personal control, one that elevated obedience above competence and fear above principle. A key part of this strategy was stacking the government with officials chosen for loyalty rather than ability. Where previous emperors had promoted ministers through rigorous examinations and proven administrative skill, Wu often bypassed these traditions entirely. She handpicked courtiers who had shown absolute devotion to her cause, even if they lacked experience or education. Many were minor functionaries, eunuchs, or personal attendants who had flattered her or assisted in her purges. She showered them with titles, estates, and power, not because they could govern well, but because they could be trusted to never question her decisions. This deliberate preference for sycophants rotted the meritocratic core of the Tang bureaucracy. Talented scholars were sidelined while pliant opportunists flourished. Policy debates gave way to flattery, court memorials became hollow praise poems. Ministers no longer argued over what was best for the empire, only over how best to echo her wishes. Wu encouraged this dynamic, rewarding the most servile voices and punishing the slightest hint of dissent. In doing so, she created a political culture where advancement depended not on serving the state but on serving her personally. At the same time, Wu distorted the legal system to crush resistance. Laws that had once protected officials from arbitrary punishment were rewritten or ignored. Courts became mere instruments of her will, staging show trials to legitimize purges she had already decided upon. Accusations of treason, slander, or disrespect to the throne could be applied to almost any behavior, from proposing alternative policies to failing to bow deeply enough. Confessions were often extracted through torture by her secret police, then used as justification to confiscate property, exile families, or execute entire clans. The law no longer restrained power, it became the weapon of power itself. This manipulation of institutions reached its peak in the structure of the central court. Traditional checks and balances, where different ministries monitored each other, were quietly dismantled. Wu created overlapping agencies whose sole purpose was to spy on each other and report directly to her. She personally reviewed minor appointments, micromanaged court rituals, and vetoed policies on whim. Ministers were reduced to functionaries acting out her commands, stripped of initiative and terrified of error. Any sign of independent thinking was branded disloyalty. The imperial government ceased to function as a collective administration and instead became a personal instrument of the empress. Fear was the glue that held this warped system together. Wu maintained her rule not through trust or consensus but through a climate of pervasive terror. Ministers knew that a misplaced word or a hesitant gesture could be construed as rebellion. Secret informants lurked in every bureau, reporting casual remarks to the throne. Those accused vanished overnight, their homes sealed, their names erased from the official rolls. Families lived in dread that ancestral honor could be annihilated in an instant. Even her closest advisors walked as if on a cliff's edge, speaking in riddles and silence to avoid provoking her suspicion. This strategy was brutally effective. By eliminating independent thinkers and surrounding herself with unquestioning loyalists, Wu ensured that no organized resistance could form. Potential factions lacked leadership, ambitious officials feared even whispering their grievances. With the bureaucracy paralyzed by fear, her decrees passed unopposed. But the cost was catastrophic. The empire's governing machinery became brittle and hollow. Corruption flourished as her favorites enriched themselves without scrutiny. Complex problems went unsolved because no one dared offer unwelcome truths. The institutions that had once balanced imperial power against collective duty now existed only to serve her whims. Even as the empire appeared stable on the surface, insiders recognized the decay. Some later chroniclers wrote that under Wu, the court became a body without a spine, able to move, yet incapable of standing upright. What had once been a disciplined meritocracy had mutated into a court of courtiers, where flattery was policy and fear was law. Wu's personal brilliance allowed her to keep this fragile system functioning for a time, but it could not outlast her. After her death, many of her appointees collapsed under accusations of incompetence or corruption, and the Tang bureaucracy required years to rebuild its integrity. In bending the state to her will, Wu Zetian achieved the total power she craved, but at the price of corroding the very foundations of governance. She proved that an empire could be ruled through loyalty and terror alone, but also that such rule left nothing enduring behind. When she was gone, the system she had created disintegrated like a structure of sand, leaving behind only the memory of her brilliance, and the fear she had etched into the bones of the court. In 705, aged and frail, Wu Zetian was forced to abdicate, ending the short-lived Zhou dynasty she had built through blood and fear. Months later she died in seclusion, the woman who had once ruled all of China reduced to a silent figure behind palace walls. Her reign left behind a court glittering on the surface but hollowed by terror, an empire where laws became weapons, loyalty outweighed merit, and power was carved from corpses. Though the Tang dynasty was restored, it bore deep scars from her rule. Wu's legacy remains a paradox. The only female emperor in Chinese history, she proved that ambition could shatter every barrier, yet her triumph devoured the system she sought to command. She rose like a blazing star, and vanished leaving only shadows, an immortal warning that power won through fear leaves only fear behind.